we got a double parsha this week, because what's the pshat? It's very simple. We have to finish up, right? We have to get to V'zois HaBrocha for Simchas Torah, so it's very simple. We've got this Shabbos is Nitzavim-Vayeilech. Next Shabbos, which is going to be the Shabbos after Rosh Hashanah, is going to be Parshas Hazinu. And then we don't have any other Shabboses because everything's going to be Yom Tov. There's Yom Kippur is on Shabbos, and then Sukkot. So we got to squeeze everything in. Yeah. Yep. And we got a 3-day Rosh Hashanah this year. It's all happening.
Can't wait.
It's all happening.
We got a lot of time in the United States. It's about time the Israelis get it 3 days.
Yeah. The emes is this year it's going to be in Chutz La'aretz. That's what they're going to have, right? Sukkot is going to be 3 days at both ends.
Wow.
It's a lot of work. Being Jewish is hard work, right? 3-day Yom Tov.
So we can't, but it's still Shabbos, right? We can't use fire.
You can't what?
It's still Shabbos, so we can't use fire? Or, I wasn't sure what you meant by we don't have Shabbos, we have Yom Tov.
Oh, it's still Shabbos. The only problem is that the Torah reading for Shabbos is preempted by the Yom Tov. So when you've got, for example, Shabbos Chol HaMoed Sukkos, you read things that have got to do with Sukkos and not to do with the regular order over here with the Pashas. So everything has to be finished up in time to be able to get to the end of the Pasha, to the end of the Torah by Simchas Torah, so you can begin the Torah again. But the good news is, even though there's two Pashas put here together in Nitzavim-Vayeilech, together they are only 70 Pesukim. Parshas Nitzavim is 40 Pesukim and Parshas Vayeilech is 30 Pesukim, right? So you don't have to be too concerned about the length. Were you concerned about the length? No. Here, let's have a look and see what we've got. This is the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. Here, Atem Nitzavim. Rashi says, Melamed. Shenichsam Moshe lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yoy Moshe. Lachnisam Bris, that this is the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, and it's going to stretch through Parshas Nitzavim-Vayeilech, Hazinu, and V'zois HaBrocha. And of course, that means that we're now at Zayin Adar. Atem Nitzavim Ayon Kulchem Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. Everybody is gathered over here together. Rosheichem, Shivteichem, Zikneichem, V'shoitreichem, Kol Ish Yisrael. Now, this sounds like a little bit of a strange description over here, right? What is it saying? Everybody's going to be gathered together. Now, if I tell you everyone needs to be gathered together, what do you understand from that?
That everybody needs to be at a certain place.
Who is everybody?
All the Jewish people.
No. So what does it say? There it says, Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. You're all gathered over here, right? And then Moshe says, Rosheichem, Shivteichem, Zikneichem, Shotreichem, Kol Ish Yisrael. What does he say?
All the men
right?
of Israel.
The heads of the tribes, the elders, the officers, all the men of Israel, right? And then the next, look at the next verse. Tapachem, Nesheichem, V'gercha asher b'kerev machanecha. Everybody. Good.
Where are we standing?
Huh?
Where are we standing?
At the entrance to Eretz Yisrael, on the border.
So that relates back to Pirkei Avot kind of thing, when he's... No, not even Pirkei Avot.
The what?
Everybody has a share, and everybody has a place in Israel, whatever.
Oh, good, okay. Maybe. Everybody's got to hear this, that's for sure. Right? The question over here is simply, if you say, Atem nitzavim ayem kulchem lifnei Hashem, right? The first words of the Parsha, that everybody's standing here today. So what do you have to go now and describe who everybody is? We know who everybody is, don't we? I mean, everybody is everybody, isn't it?
Yeah, but when you always ask a question like, well, where was I during the receiving of the Torah? Or whatever?
Oh, good, okay.
And then you see that you're actually there because it represents you, as in when it says your small children, your women, and your whatever. So everybody's counted.
Everybody's counted, which means like this. That is it's a very important point. It really is. That first of all, what is being established absolutely is a concept of a hierarchy. That's first off. If you want your society to run smoothly, if you want your society to run the way that it's supposed to run, you have to have a hierarchy. Right? Communism, where they claimed that everybody was equal, was very unequal. Everybody knew that it was unequal because you had people who were running somebody has to run the country, right? Somebody's got to be in charge of the court system. Somebody's got to be in charge of the policing. So, I mean, that's just the way it goes, right? So what Moshe is establishing right now is something very fundamental. That's first off, which is what? Moshe is going to die. That's what Rashi says. Why do we need to know this is the last day of Moshe's life? Because it's important for us to understand that after Moshe Rabbeinu dies, there's going to be, this hierarchy is going to exist.
The Sosa Bracha, who wrote that? Moshe or Yeshua?
Moshe wrote all of it except for the last 8 verses at the end.
But one of them has a different, the wording is like, because it said the tear of
Yeah.
Moshe.
So it says over there are 2 different opinions which are given. First one is that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it in tears, not using ink, and then Yoshua came and wrote it out afterwards. The other opinion is that he wrote it all jumbled up, and then Yoshua came afterwards and separated the words. Right, he wrote it all as just one elongated thing without any gaps, and then he separated the words.
So it's really happening now too. I mean, apart from Parshat and Sukkah, I mean, when he's gathering everybody.
Yeah.
Do you know what I don't get though? If you're, because we're brought up to know that basically we don't know when we're going to die. So how did Moshe know? Doesn't that disprove that point?
Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu tells him, which is, you're right, under normal circumstances you've got no idea when you're going to die, right? And that's why the Mishnah Pirkei says that you should do tshuva on the day before you die, right? So everybody asks the same, you don't know when you're going to die. So the answer is you got to do tshuva every day. That's okay, that's good, right? But here, Moshe Rabbeinu is being told by Kadosh Baruch Hu that that's it, right? Now, the emphasis is like this: by Moshe Rabbeinu, there's nothing novel over here. Moshe Rabbeinu's brief was what? Was to bring the Jewish people from Egypt to the land of Israel.
And that's why he's saying, I led you for 40 years in the wilderness.
Yeah, 100%, which means that I've done my bit.
And now it's
right?
over to you.
Yeah, that's really what he's saying. And that's why Moshe knows, even if HaKadosh Baruch Hu wouldn't tell him that this was the last day of his life, he knows that he's come to the end of because he's come to the end of what he needs to do here in this world.
Rashi
You
says
already told him that he's not going to be able to go to outside Israel.
Because Rashi says that the 40 years of wandering was basically more than Moshe mentioned that. It was basically saying, do you know what, this is another reason why should be only literally the start of your belief.
Yeah.
In that kind of thing. Then also it said at the end of here today, it says at the end of this part, and with whoever who is not here today, with us today.
Oh, we're going to get there. Hashem. You're jumping ahead right now. Let's just stick with what we know, right? So far, what have we got over here? We've got Moshe Rabbeinu saying that I'm not going to be here any longer. I'm going to die, right? But you need to know that there is a hierarchy that exists over here that is going to run the Jewish people. How does it work? Here, Roshechem, Shiftechem. Rashi says, where is it? Roshechem, Shiftechem. Achoshev koidem. Whoever's more important appears first in the list over here, right? Which means you've got Roshechem, Shiftechem, the heads of the tribes, Zikneichem, the elders, Shotreichem, which are the here they call them the officers, which is probably a pretty good translation. Kol Ish Yisrael, and everybody else.
Do you know? One more question for you quickly. I really don't get this. When Moshe did his final charge in this, why didn't we see a reaction? As in, why didn't we see any reaction from the Jewish people?
It's a very good question. There's a lot of non-reaction of the Jewish people when it comes, interestingly enough, when it comes to the death of Moshe Rabbeinu in general. Right? You would have thought that Moshe Rabbeinu is getting up now and he's telling everybody is, Rabbi, I'm going to die. Right?
No, you
would expect everybody to be in tears. You would expect everybody to say, no, we don't want this to happen. And what can we do to stop this, right? Yeah. And yet the Jewish people don't react in any way whatsoever. And what's interesting is that it says that when Aaron died, the lashon in the verse, the language that the verse uses is that the whole of the house of Israel cried.
So why are they crying now?
Over here, it's more than that. Over here, it says when Moshe died, it says that the Jewish people died. The Jewish people cried. It doesn't say they all did. So the Medrash says something absolutely fascinating. You know the difference between Moshe and Aaron, their personalities? Aaron was very soft. Aaron was very loving. Aaron, peace, running around trying to make peace between people and making sure. Everybody loved Aaron HaKohen. It was impossible not to love him. To the point it says that when Aaron HaKohen died, 80,000 children that were named Aaron followed along in the funeral procession. Because he used to make shalom bayis between a husband and a wife. They fell out with each other, right? So he would make peace between them. So when they had a child, they would name him after Aaron. It was like some kind of an honor, yeah? Aaron was one of these people who everybody loved. Moshe Rabbeinu he comes across as being even though it's not true, but to the Jewish people he comes across as being very strict. Right? He's very inflexible. You can only do what God wants you to do, and he keeps telling them off, right? When they do
really
things they're not supposed to do.
God, not the people. I mean, he was really the connection.
He's the connection. It's not serving God and not the people. He's the connection between the two, right? When you're the connection between the two, you don't have the luxury of necessarily being a nice guy. I always tell over like this, right? A successful principal in a school, right? Let's say a high school, right? A successful principal is not somebody who necessarily wins any popularity contest. That's not his task. That's not his function. Right? You go to schools that run properly and run well, very often they have very unpopular principals, right? Very unpopular headmaster. Why would that be? Because his job is to make sure the school runs, right? The others, all the other teachers, they can vie for who's going to be the most popular teacher. Here, Moshe Rabbeinu, he's not. He doesn't have the luxury to be able to be soft and to flexible and to listen to everybody and do whatever everyone wants him to do. He can't do that because he's got to bring the Jewish people from Egypt to the land of Israel through the desert. He's got to feed them. He's got to give them water. He's got to protect them, and they've got to do what God wants them to do. And if they don't do that, they won't get what they're supposed to get.
Why was he still allowed to be the leader after he hit the rock?
So the Emes says that was really the end. That's towards the end anyway. Right? And that really is the end of his tenure as being the leader of the Jewish people. But what's the pshat? God tells Moshe he's got to bring the Jewish people to the land of Israel. Again, that's his task. So that's what he's got to do. And now he's brought them to the land of Israel. The Medrash says the most incredible thing. For us, it's almost impossible to understand this. But the Medrash says that when Moshe Rabbeinu died, not everybody was sad. Because Moshe Rabbeinu came across as being this kind of this, I'm trying not to use the word harsh, but I guess that's the best word to use, right?
I thought I was saying he was a messenger.
Huh?
That messenger.
He's a messenger. We understand that because we read the Psukim and we understand what's going on, right? But the people that were living there at the time, they lose sight of the fact that he's God's messenger. They just see Moshe telling them what to do the whole time. And telling them off, right? And they see time on various occasions, they see the Jewish people being battered by plagues and by divine anger, right?
But never under Aaron's leadership.
No, Aaron is, completely... Well, what's the way to describe? Aaron is like completely and absolutely flexible within Klal Yisrael. He's charismatic, and he'll always try to find the positive dimension of something. Aaron HaKohen is the half full, right? And Moshe seems to come across as being the half empty.
Because he's always...
So what's pshat? I tell you the real pshat is that Aaron can afford to be like that because Aaron's not the leader of the Jewish people, right? I mean, Moshe is the leader of the Jewish people. And Moshe is the one that the absolute responsibility stops with him. Right, who was it that had on his desk? Was it Eisenhower, I think, no? That the buck stops here? Truman? That the buck stops here.
Truman.
I mean, that's what it's supposed to be. And by Moshe Rabbeinu, the buck definitely stops over there, without any doubt whatsoever. And that means that he doesn't have the luxury to be able to say to everybody, oh, that's sweet, that's nice, okay, we'll work it out, it'll be, And because of that, some of the Jewish people were not, they weren't,
mourning.
They weren't mourning at all, unfortunately. And I think that's why we don't hear about a reaction over here, because I'm sure there were many people that were very upset, right? But whatever reaction was going on over here, it wasn't communal. Which is, you have one person over here who's terribly upset, his next door neighbor. It's like, okay, well, that's life. You live and you die.
Who got passed on to leadership after Moshe?
Yoshua.
Why not
Aaron? Mitzvah Hashem will come to it because over here in this week's Parsha, we see the transference of leadership actually takes place. So when we get there, we'll talk about it. Mitzvah Hashem, right?
Yeah.
So tapachem neshechem gecha asher bekerev machanecha mechotoy v'techa ad shoy v'memecha la'avracha bevris Hashem Elokecha b'va'ol asoi. that we're going to pass this Brit. What is a Brit? A covenant, right? A pact between ourselves and God is going to be passed over to the Jewish people. God's making this pact now together with the Jewish people again, right? We're going to become the Jewish people, and He's going to be our God, exactly the way that God said. In the same way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who of course are the forefathers, they're the ones who we're established, the Jewish people are established upon Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? And then verse number 13, which is the verse that you were asking about, right? Which is a very, very, is it here? Yeah, it's very, very, very fundamental. V'lo itchem levadchem. Not just you. Anochi koreises abris hazois v'sala hazois, ki es asher yeshnu poi imanu oimed hayoim lifnei Hashem Elokeinu. The people that are standing here in front of God right now, ve'es asher einenu poi imanu hayoim. And those who are not standing together with us over here. What does this mean? So here, very basic questions that always get asked. Why do I have to keep the mitzvahs? Well, we stood at Har Sinai and we received the Torah from God, right? So what is the most obvious answer to that kind of a response? Well, that's great. My great-great-great-grandparents stood at Har Sinai and they received the Torah. Let them keep the Torah. What's that got to do with me? It's a very basic question, it really is. It's very nice that they were so connected to God that they wanted to keep His mitzvahs, but why does that mean that I've got to do it? Why do I have to keep the mitzvahs as well? So the pshat over here is anyone who's here and anyone who's not here, that the commitment that's been made is a commitment that stretches beyond the here and now. That's it. It's gone forever, right? Is that fair? So I'll tell you the truth. It's got nothing to do with what's fair and what's not fair. It's not fair to use fair in context with God. Because what God sees is something completely different to what we have. And what God needs is completely different to what we imagine we need. Is it fair on us that we have to be Jewish because our great-great-great-great-grandparents stood at Har Sinai to receive the Torah and then it was reiterated over here? Is that fair? No, it's not fair. Does it have any bearing whatsoever on whether I have a choice in the matter? No, none whatsoever. I have to do what I have to do because I'm part of the commitment that was made. That's not fair. You know what? Here, let's work it out. Let's take an example. There are hundreds of examples, but let's take an example of which is relatively new. Right? For 100 and, how many was it? 150 years, I think. Or maybe it was 190 years, I can't remember. Britain had leased Hong Kong from the Chinese Empire. Right, from the Chinese emperor, the British had leased Hong Kong. It was a very important port situation for them, and they leased it for 150. I think it was 150 years. Come what may, whenever it was, I think if I've got my dates right, in 1999 the lease came up, and the Chinese said that they're not interested in renewing the lease, which means that Hong Kong is going to revert to China. Now, you can imagine all the people in Hong Kong were very, very unenthusiastic. Hong Kong is a democracy. Hong Kong is a place where one of the financial hubs of the world. It's a place which is thriving, and it did not want to be incorporated into communist China. So they brought a case to the international court. Right now, what they were claiming was something which has got a lot of merit, which is the original contract that was drawn up, the original commitment that was made between the British Empire and the Chinese Empire is null and void. Why is that? Because the Chinese Empire doesn't exist anymore. It's now a different place. It's communist China, which means that the original agreement that was made was between two entities, and one of those entities is no longer there. It's no longer extant, and therefore there's no way that communist China can now claim that Hong Kong belongs to them. Now, I don't know, if you ask me, I think logically, I think that's a relatively strong argument. I really do.
Well, they're still having problems.
That's still
They're
that's
having problems
that's for
now.
sure. Hold on, before we get to the problems, right? But the argument itself is an argument which I think holds water. I think it's a pretty good argument. The International Court did not accept the argument. Why not? Because a binding contract was drawn up between two parties, and now we are 200 years down the line, and it doesn't make any difference whatsoever that the two parties are no longer the same parties that they were. The agreement was made, and it was made for all of the generations that come afterwards. You hear? Did anybody take into account the generation that lives in Hong Kong today? No, nobody took it into account when the agreement was made. There are international treaties that are made all over history that are going to have an impact on people hundreds and hundreds of years later, and the fact that they had no say in what was going on, and the fact that they're being impacted by something which they disagree with, has got nothing to do with anything. It's a legally binding contract. When our great-great-great-grandparents stood at Har Sinai and received the Torah, accepted the Torah upon themselves, they weren't just accepting Torah for themselves. It wasn't just for them. It wasn't just for the generations that stood at Har Sinai, however many there were, 4, 5, whatever were there. They're making a commitment for themselves and for everybody that comes afterwards as well. Which means that now, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is reiterating, when this whole thing is being put, it's being re-emphasized all over again. So says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ki es asher yeshnu po yimanu oimed hayom lifnei Hashem Elokeinu, that this is not just a commitment that's being made between those of us that are here right now. It's for those that aren't here as well. You hear? That's a pretty strong commitment. And that's why it's not possible to come and say, you know what, I don't care what my grandparents said. I don't want to do it, because the commitment is there. Interestingly enough, in China, in Hong Kong right now, the Chinese they've been relatively flexible with Hong Kong up until now, like 14 years, whatever it is. But now they've got new elections coming up, I think in 2017, something like that. And they have announced that only people, pre-approved people, will be allowed to stand for the leadership of the Hong Kong community. Which means that slowly but surely, democracy in Hong Kong is being chipped away. A little bit by bit. Can anything be done about it? I don't think so. I mean, the people in Hong Kong, they can go out onto the streets and they can demonstrate, and they can try to, they can try to change things from their side, but I don't think legally very much can be done within the world community. I really don't.
I think China will be flexible. A lot of money comes into it.
Oh gosh, and how, for sure. So it's one of the most important financial hubs in the world.
They're not going to kill the golden goose.
I don't know. Communists they behave in a very bizarre fashion sometimes. I'm not saying that no one else doesn't, but communists is just more noticeable, that's all. Here, let's have a look at verse number 15, which means what's the bad news? The bad news is that you got to keep it, because that's what we're being told to do, right? That's what's been put into place over here.
I have a question
Yeah.
in the beginning of this sentence. It says the heads of your tribes, your elders. There was, wasn't there a committee signing the old,
Yeah, for
why
sure.
are they second compared to the
Oh, because what's Pshat? The heads of the tribes were in a category of their own. It's interesting, when Moshe Rabbeinu put together that hierarchy of one person in charge of 10, and one person in charge of 50, and one person in charge of 100, and one person in charge of 1,000, right? When he put that all together, that was the hierarchy that was going to take place of the legal issues that would arise inside of the Jewish people. However, there are 12 people who are more powerful than everybody else, and those are the leaders of the tribes. They're in their own category.
What about the elders?
They're more. They have. Oh, so for sure. What's pshat? Under normal circumstances, what's supposed to happen is that the leaders of the tribes are supposed to subjugate themselves to what the elders are saying. The elders, of course, are the Talmidei Chachamim. They're the scholars. They're the ones who are defining what the halacha is supposed to be. But the elders, but the leaders of the tribe are in their own category. They belong. They belong in a category which is not. It's got nothing to do with the legal dimension, right? And that makes them very, very, very powerful people. Right, the Nasi, the leader of each tribe, was a tremendously powerful personality, and sometimes it was good, and sometimes it wasn't so good. Right? Sometimes it didn't quite work out the way that it was supposed to work out. Ki atem yadatem etz asher yeshavta be'eretz Mitzrayim ve'etz asher avanu b'kerev hagoyim asher avatem. V'tiru es shekutzeisem v'es guleihem eitz v'even kesef v'zav asher imahem. Listen to these verses. Listen to how strange they are. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is now warning the Jewish people not to get involved in Avodah Zarah, not to worship idols, right? So what's he telling them? He's saying that in Egypt, you saw what was going on in Egypt. You saw the words abominations, detestable idols, wood and stone, silver and gold, yeah? Pei yesh bachem ish o isha o mishpach o shevet asher levavo poine hayoim im Hashem Elokeinu leches la'avodes Elohei hagoyim hahem pei yesh bachem shoresh poreh v'rosh v'la'ana. Yehipshat, I understand what's going on. How long ago were they in Egypt? 40 years ago, right? At least a generation. Yeah, for sure, right? Which means what? What are we talking about? We're talking about something which took place 40 years ago, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Moshe Rabbeinu was telling them what? That you have to be careful from something that you saw 40 years ago. You got to be very careful with that stuff, right? Yipshat, I don't know. Doesn't this sound a little bit, I don't know, far-fetched? You know, they've had dealings with Ammon and Moab, and they've had dealings with Amalek, and they've had dealings with this nation and that nation, and they're all worshipping idols, yeah? But why is Moshe going back to idols that they saw? Some of them didn't even see them because some of them weren't in Egypt at all, because it's a new generation, right? So what's pshat? Here, that's exactly what he's saying. Look what he's saying. Ki atem yedatem eis asher yeshavnu be'eretz Mitzrayim ve'eis asher avanu b'kerev hagoyim asher avatem. You saw what was going on over there. Terrible, right? Detestable idols that are made out of all wood and gold and silver. Good. But why are you going back to Egypt? So the Bali, I must say the most incredible chiddush over here. The emphasis is based on a Bala Tanya. Anybody here, if you're familiar with the Tanya, from Chabad, right? The Bala Tanya was the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he wrote this sefer called the Tanya. The Tanya is the most astonishing work. And over there he writes something, amongst other things. I mean, it's a long work, right? But amongst one of the things that he writes over there is something very, very disturbing. He says, things that you see stick with you for 70 years. Right? Images that you see will remain in your conscious or your subconscious for 70 years. You know, they did a whole bunch of research on déjà vu. Right? You know what déjà vu is? Something happens and you know what's going to happen. Yeah? That's French. You must know what déjà vu is, right? You knew I was going to say that. Yeah. Déjà vu. And they've come to the conclusion that déjà vu is something that happened a long time ago that's embedded in your subconscious, which is similar enough to what's going on right now to make you think that you know what's going on. It triggers off. The memory is now brought to the front of your mind, and it triggers off a reaction as if you now know what's going to happen. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't have a clue. I'm not going to get involved in we're not getting involved in a debate over here about déjà vu, right? But the very fact that the psychologists and psychiatrists have come up with an explanation for déjà vu like that is absolutely in tune with what the Bala Tanya is saying. The Bala Tanya is saying that what you see sticks with you for 70 years. The images that you see are there. They're embedded somewhere in your mind for 70 years. And that's pretty disturbing. Because we all see things that we shouldn't be looking at, and we all see things that we don't want to see, and they're going to be there embedded in our minds. And I think that's mamish pshat over here as well. What's pshat? The place that they had the biggest exposure to idol worship was where? In Egypt. Right? In Egypt, their exposure to idol worship was all-encompassing. It says that the Jewish people had to leave Egypt straight away. They couldn't stay another minute, right? Why? Because they'd slipped so far down in spiritual levels that if they would have slipped any further, they would never get out again. Which means they weren't doing so great. And here, what Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them is that what happened 40 years ago is something which is now embedded. You know, Chalila, it could be embedded in the psyche of the Jewish people. You were exposed to idol worship. Many people actually worshipped idols over there. So Moshe Rabbeinu is warning them from something which took place 40 years ago, and he's warning some of the people that weren't even in Egypt at the time. They weren't born yet. And yet Moshe Rabbeinu is warning them that you've got to be very careful with this stuff because it's in there. The desire has now been implanted, and now you've got to fight against it. Here, pein yesh bechem isha oy mishpocha oy shevet asher levovoy poine ayoy mi'im Hashem Elokeinu leleches la'avodes elei agoyim.
Once it says isha, why do you have to bring mishpacha and the shit?
Oh, here it's a good question. I think what Moshe is doing over here, I think that Moshe is emphasizing. This is like a little bit of a poetic license over here, right? Of course, he could say it could be that anybody has been influenced by what's going on. But he wants to knock it home, right? Ish, or Isha, or Mishpacha, or Shevet. Maybe it's not just one person, maybe it's not just one man, maybe it's not just one woman, maybe it's a whole family, maybe it's a whole Shevet. Gotta be careful. We've got to be careful about the effect that things have had on us in the past that are going to make us react in a certain way in the future. Got to work on that one. You know, Rav Mendel Weinbach told me once, the most incredible thing he said, a lady once came to visit him. It's a lady, he'd made her frum years before. And now, 10 years later, she came to visit him with her husband and with her children, that he should shep a little bit of nachas, he should see the fruits of what he'd managed to do. So he told me that she said to him that until today, she's been frum for 10 years, she says, until today, I have the most incredible desire from time to time to eat lobster. Before I became frum, I ate lobster. It was a tremendous delicacy for me. I loved it. And even now, 10 years later, I still have the desire from time to time to have a piece of lobster. So Rav Mendel, he said to me like this interesting thing. The Gemara says that b'makom b'balei tshuva oindim, a place where balei tshuva stand, where a place where a balei tshuva stands, a tzaddik gomor cannot stand over there. A completely righteous person can't stand there. So Rav Mendel said that, that's mamish pshat in the Gemara. What's pshat? You have a tzaddik gomor. He looked at me, he says, do you understand the desire to eat lobster? So I told him, no, I don't. I've never eaten lobster before. I don't understand. Is it that complicated not to want to eat it? So Rav Mendel laughed. He said, I don't understand it either. He says, but this woman who's been frum for the last 10 years, right? And she still has to struggle from time to time with a desire for something that she hasn't had for 10 years already, and that's something that she had in a previous lifestyle that's now embedded inside of her. So he said, that's a pshat in the Gemara. The Gemara says, "B'makom shabali tshuva oindim," a place where a Baal Tshuva stands. A tzaddik gomor can't stand over there. Why not? Because a tzaddik gomor doesn't have the tests that a Baal Tshuva has to go through. Whether it's food, whether it's lifestyle, whether it's environment, whatever it is, it makes no difference. So I once heard an interesting pshat. It says like this: "B'makom shabali tshuva omdim, a tzaddik gomor can't stand over there." So I once heard an interesting pshat from Rav Leff. He said like this. He says, maybe lemaisa, maybe it's talking literally. In a place where a Baal Tshuva can stand, a tzaddik gomor, someone who's pure and righteous, can't stand over there. So he said, a Baal Tshuva can walk down Ben Yehuda Street in the middle of the summer and he's not going to be affected so badly because that was a part of what he was exposed to beforehand. It says, but you take a tzaddik gomer, someone who's never been exposed to anything like that before in his life, and you send him down Ben Yehuda, it can have the most terrible effect on him. So not only are Chazal trying to teach us that the Balei Tshuva have got certain schuyot, certain merits that a tzaddik gomer can't have because he hasn't had what they've had, but on top of that as well is the idea, like a practical dimension, that a Baal Tshuva can go off and do things. That's why I think the people involved in outreach, very often the most effective outreach people are people who were reached out to themselves. Right? Balei Tshuva are normally very, very effective in outreach because they know exactly what the other person's going through. They can empathize with them, and they can feel together with them. Lahavdil, I'm not, don't misunderstand me, but I think that the most effective drug counselors are people who were once drug addicts.
That's right.
Because otherwise, can you understand what the person's going through? You can't understand. We just don't understand, right? I mean, somebody has a problem with breaking a particular desire that they've got, whatever it is, whether it's, I always tell my wife, my side of the family is, I would say we are calorifically challenged. We're all a little bit on the plump side. Right? My wife is incredibly skinny. Now, my wife is incredibly skinny because food does not interest her. It's weird, right? I don't even know if she's Jewish. Can you imagine a Jew who is not interested by food? Is quite bizarre, no? But she's just like she eats food because when she gets a little bit hungry, so she'll eat something, and then right. So she's always she tells me, you could drop a couple of pounds, and some of my kids, you could drop a couple of pounds. I keep telling her, it's you don't understand. You just don't. You don't get it because you don't have that. You don't live that kind of a lifestyle. It's like, for you, it's like, what's the big deal? So just don't eat. Like, what could be so complicated about losing weight? Just don't eat. So of course she's right. We all know that if you want to lose weight, you got to stop eating, or at least cut down on what you're eating. But to do that, it's a little bit more complicated, right? So for somebody like my wife, it's no big deal. But for me, it is. Anyway, I mean, if I were to lose a lot of weight, then, what would she give me a hard time about? Right? You always got to have something there that she can, right? For sure. I always tell everybody I was born in the wrong generation. A few generations ago, if you were fat, that was a good sign. It was a sign you were wealthy. It was a sign that you were healthy. Right? I was born in the wrong generation, that's all. It's not fair. Story of my life. You should know that. Right, so what does he say? He says like this: that if you allow these things to take root, right, in the pasuk on page 1088, if you allow these things to take root, pein yesh bechem shoresh pore roish v'la'ana, that what? That they'll flourish within inside of you, like something like some kind of a some kind of a disease. Here it says like gall or wormwood, something. What's the pshat? Wormwood is something very, very small. You don't see it. By the time you realize that there's a problem, it's already overtaken whatever it is that it's eating its way through. And that's what he's saying. You look at somebody who has desires to worship idols, you don't see anybody who's different from anybody else. He looks just the same. And by the time it becomes apparent, it's too late. V'aya b'shamoyes divrei ala azois v'isbareich bilvavoy lemor shalom yeli ki b'shirus libi eilech. So what is he here? When a person hears all of these things being told to him, he'll bless himself in his heart and he'll say, Shalom yeli. For me, everything is good. Right? What does that mean? Keep b'shirus libi eilech. I'm going to go according to my heart. Right? Laman sfois harava es atzmeya. Yeah? So is that good or it's not good? Even if he's doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants him to do, is it good or it's not good? Let's look at the next verse, because it becomes the opposite of what we think. Lo yoiva Hashem sloyach loi ki az yeshan af Hashem וכי באיש ההוא ורצה בוי כל העולה הכסובה בספר הזה, ומוך השמש שמוי מתחת השמיים. HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't forgive him. His name will be erased from the heavens.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? It means, first of all, it means that he himself won't leave any of himself behind over here in the world. He'll be removed, gone, right?
Well, is that if we transgress?
I don't know. It's very not clear, is it?
Yeah.
It's very, very unclear over
That,
here.
is it personal or is it as a United Nation? We won't see.
No, here it's talking about the person personally, right? Each person individually, right?
And then it says that's so weird that it says that Hashem will not be willing to forgive him.
Yeah.
Because we understand that we have a forgiving God.
Oh, so listen. So Rashi says like this, right? If you read Rashi over here, Rashi says that a person makes mistakes that he didn't know about, right? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets angry with him because what? Because you're supposed to know, right? However, there's something much deeper over here. What is the problem? The key to the problem over here is that the fellow says, "V'isbarech bilvavoi leimor." He'll say in his heart, "Shalom yihye li." I'll be okay, right? Yehipshat. I'll be okay. Everything will be okay with me. Other things can happen to other people. Bad things, terrible things can happen to other people, but I am going to be okay. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu will not forgive that. You hear?
Mm-hmm.
I once heard in the name of one of the Hasidic Rebbes, I think it was Rav Naftali Mirobchitz, who used to say that he far prefers to spend time with a Rasha, with a wicked person who knows that he's wicked, than to spend time with a tzaddik, a righteous person who knows that he's righteous. A righteous person who knows that he's righteous is tzaddik yali. I'm okay. What about you? That's your problem, right?
Yeah.
I'm okay. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for that HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't forgive. You hear where the source of God's anger is coming from, because the Jewish people are attached to each other. Anybody who says, Shalom yali, anybody who says that I'll be okay, he doesn't understand that. He thinks that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to judge him alone and say, oh, okay, you know what, this guy's a great guy. Everybody else is going to be wiped out except for him.
What about who are you to say that he'll be okay?
You know what, that's something else also. It's the most incredible arrogance, right? To be able to turn around and say, I'm okay. You're right. Maybe that's also part of the anger of God, is that thread of gaiva, of arrogance, to say, here, I'm okay. Shalom yeli. How can you say such a thing? You're right. Right? How can a person come out with such a statement? I'm okay. It's very disturbing. It really is.
Very selfish.
It's very selfish. I think what makes it so disturbing is that, in my humble opinion, I think we probably all are guilty of this.
Yeah.
At one point or another.
It wasn't only that. It was also, you can see it through Moshe. If you look back on his life, I'm angry with you. When he talks to Jewish people, I'm angry. It's after Red Chef, I'm angry with you. It's not, at no point did you feel that he would actually. I felt a lot of the time that it was actually Moshe that was angry, not Hashem.
It's interesting that the sages point out that whenever Moshe gets angry with the Jewish people, he gets angry because of something they've done against God.
Yeah.
But it is very conceivable that in the perception of the Jewish people, what do they see? They see Moshe becoming angry, and then God reacts. Right? So, for example, Moshe gets angry, tells off the Jewish people, and then God sends a plague. So, if you're in the Jewish people, we're all in the Jewish people, what do we see? What's the progression over here?
He's the headmaster, telling the kids off.
But what's the progression, though? Moshe gets angry, so God now has to react, and we're getting zapped.
And if he didn't get angry, then he wouldn't have to react.
Oh, right. What they're not realizing, which is something terribly important, what they're not realizing is that Moshe's reaction is what's saving them. Because they have to have it brought to their attention they've done something wrong in order to be able to do something about the mistake that they've made. And if they don't do that, then things are going to go far worse than they are right now, which means that when God reacts, when God punishes the Jewish people, it's already been tempered by Moshe doing whatever he's done or saying whatever he said. But the Jewish people, they don't see that, because that's very delicate, that's very sensitive.
They're used to the way that Moshe speaks.
Yeah. It's an important thing. It really is. Everything comes down to perception, which means you can look at Moshe. One person will look at Moshe and one person will say, it's fantastic what he did because he deflected God's anger. It was going to be much worse than it was, right? And the other person's looking and saying, my gosh, what did he just do? He just brought God's anger upon us.
What right does he have? When God says to him, strike the rock, what right does he have to hit the rock? What right did Moshe have to hit that rock?
Here, so again, the Mefarshim talk about it at great length, right? What was his rights? What weren't his rights? You're right. It's 100% true. It's a big question. It's a question that's got an awful lot of approaches to it. The Ramban, for example, says that the mistake was that he got angry, right? Less that he hit the rock, but by hitting the rock, he was demonstrating the fact that he became momentarily angry and he lost a little bit of control.
And it's at that point when you lose your leadership that you could.
Yeah.
The minute that you have that one moment of anger, that's when you lose it all. Yeah.
Which means that when to be a leader of 1 or 10 or 50 or 100 or even 1,000, there's a lot of leeway, lots of flexibility, right? But to be the ultimate leader over everybody, no, you have to take responsibility for whatever has happened. And if I made a mistake, then that mistake has to be rectified. If God says the way to rectify that mistake is by not letting Moshe go into the land of Israel, then that's what needs to be. We don't see the balance between the two. The reaction of God is enormous compared to what Moshe did.
Because he doesn't apologize to him.
Good. I'm just saying, from our perspective, right? The only thing that Moshe wants to do is go into the land of Israel, and that's the only thing that God takes away from him.
What is the sheep?
Whatever, good. I mean, again, for us, it's easy to understand these things because we're just reading the words and we're trying to intellectualize what's going on, right? Mm-hmm. But over there, when you look and you see what's going on, sometimes we imagine to ourselves that God's reaction is completely out of proportion to whatever took place. And sometimes we think to ourselves, my gosh, God's reaction is like really mellow. How come he didn't react more? Yeah, I'll give you an example. The sin of the golden calf. We all know the sin of the golden calf was enormous, right? We're still paying for that one today. How many people died? As a direct result of the sin of the golden calf, how many people died? 3,000. Take, for example, when Zimri, the prince of the tribe of Shimon, has relations with a Moabite princess, and then the tribe of Shimon try to fight against the rest of the Jewish people, God sends a plague and 24,000 people die.
Doesn't add up.
3,000 people, and we're still feeling the reverberations of what took place. And the 24,000 people, nobody even knows that story, right? The 24,000 people dying over there. So what's the pshat? I don't know. Maybe pshat is like this: that the 24,000 people, once they've been taken care of, the problem's been taken care of. But the sin of the golden calf is a problem which stretched out throughout the entire Jewish nation. So in the end, what did God do? He only took the lives of those people that were actively involved in it, and everybody else that was just standing around giving tacit approval to what was going on, them he didn't do anything about it. Maybe it works, right, in an inverted ratio. It's hard to know, right? Truly it's hard to know. At the end of the day, Moshe Rabbeinu selflessly left the Jewish people through the desert for 40 years, right? He put up with everything and he dealt with everything, and he was a leader, an incomparable leader. Like what's his name? Like the Rambam says, there was never anybody like Moshe. There will be nobody like Moshe. I mean, Moshe is Moshe, right? And yet, this mistake over here of hitting the rock, he didn't even hit the Jewish people, right? He just hit the rock.
Because he put himself before God.
Whatever.
Yeah.
You can come up with all the reasons in the world. The question over here is, do we see a parallel between what he did to what he was punished with? Not necessarily, right?
The punishment was enormous.
The punishment is absolutely enormous for what? Okay, so what did he do exactly? I don't know. He hit instead of talking. So again, you can build up an argument for all of the different reasons why he did what he did, both for the good and for the bad, right?
It's a point that always annoys me, how everybody stands here and says, "Oh, Moshe was the most amazing leader," and everything. I honestly don't think he was. Simply because if you look at it here, it says, but Hashem, look at it last week. He said, I led you for 40 years. It was me, not, do you know what I mean? He sometimes seems to convince that he's actually God sometimes.
Nah, for sure. You know, the Torah says about Moshe Rabbeinu that he was an ish anav mikol adam. He was the most humble of people. Which means that when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks in a way that seems to be perhaps lacking a little bit of humility, it's because he has something of such incredible importance that has to be given across. He's prepared to say it in a way that will be understood entirely, right? And that's you know, on the few occasions when it sounds like Moshe is sort of overstepping the boundary a little bit. So there you need to look at each one and you need to understand what exactly is he trying to say over here. So over here, what's he saying? I took you out, right? And I brought you through the land of it. So further back in Parshat V'Etchanan, when he says that, the reason he's doing that, say Chazal, it's a medrash already, that say Chazal, that he's doing that because he wants the Jewish people to realize what he did for them, so they would daven to God to rescind the decree against him. They didn't chap it. They didn't catch what he was trying to tell them, right? But he's telling them, I took you out of the land of Egypt and I brought you through the desert in order they should understand the enormity of what Moshe Rabbeinu did for them. And then when they realize just how enormous Moshe Rabbeinu is within the Jewish people, then they'll suddenly realize, hold on a second, we can't let him go. And they'll daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to allow him to go into the land of Israel. The Jewish people were oblivious to it. They didn't like we tend to be, right? Jewish people are very good at being oblivious.
Tremendous sign from the Rabbi Shalom on punishing Moshe, which was a small thing. But I think it's also telling the people, you got to be angry, I will be. Even the smallest thing. Maybe.
Again, I mean, the Gemara says that the greater you are, the closer HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges you. Kechut hasayra, down to the breadth of a hair.
You're the one that has to represent.
Yeah. And the greater your representation is, the greater your obligation is, the greater is your responsibility. You don't have room to be able to, whatever they say, to let your hair down. You can't do that. I'm trying to remember who I read it. I can't try to remember who I read it about. But one of the monarchs in Europe, could even have been a contemporary. I don't know. Maybe even the Queen of England. I don't know. But one of them said that being the king or the queen is you are being watched the whole time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're being watched by everybody. And the minute you do something stupid, everybody's going to pounce on it.
That's true.
And the person said that it was like an awful life. We would probably all think being king is probably not bad, right? But they were saying it's an awful life to have because there's no sense of privacy. Moshe Rabbeinu has no privacy in his life, none whatsoever. Everything he does is open for everybody to judge, and everybody has something to say about him, and he's also got to worry about his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. That's a Parshat, right? We'll stop over here. Mitzvah Hashem, to be continued.